Long ago, nestled in a cradle of emerald hills, there stood a kingdom so beautiful it seemed plucked from a dream. Its castle, carved from pale stone, caught the sun like a beacon of grace. But it was the roses that made the land unforgettable. They climbed every surface, arched over bridges, and coiled through the cobbled streets like veins of color. Blooms so thick it perfumed the grounds. There were rumors that nature fell in love with the crown and cloaked it in flowers. Yet with all its beauty and fortune, a shadow moved beneath the surface. A curse, old as the stones themselves, ran through the bloodline of its kings, quiet and merciless. It began with whispers in the dark. Then minds began to fray. People wandered into the roses and never returned. Some vanished without a sound. Others screamed while they slowly lost their minds. Inside those walls, high in the eastern wing, a young king named Alric stood by the window. He held his 3-year-old daughter, Isla, her hair wild with sleep. The roses outside swayed in the morning breeze. "Papa, what's that?" Isla pointed to a faded painting on the wall. A peacock, its feathers rich with forgotten colors. "That, my child, was a beautiful bird that used to roam the lands." Isla kept staring at the painting. "Where are they, Papa?" The king responded, "They're gone now, but some say they could grant a single wish to someone pure of heart." Isla's eyes widened a bit. The door creaked open behind them. Miranda, Alric's wife, stepped in, one hand resting on the swell of her pregnant belly. "If they granted wishes," Miranda said, "I'd wish to feel my toes again. These royal ankles weren't made for 3 kids." Kaysen, Isla's twin, sat on the floor playing with wooden blocks. Isla rushed to join him, cloth doll in hand. Kaysen took the doll, examining it with quiet fascination. Isla started to cry. Kaysen stared at his sister and back at the doll in his little hands. The king and queen watched them settle this amongst themselves. After a moment, Kaysen walked over and held the doll out to his sister. Isla took it, sputtering little noises of relief. They started playing together, like nothing had happened. A knock came at the door, 3 quick raps. Alric looked at Miranda, who nodded. He opened the door to find Thorn, a guard looking grim and dusty. "My lord," Thorn said, bowing. "Sorry to interrupt." Thorn stepped inside. "It's your great-uncle, Lord Edran. He put on quite a scene at the Vine Goat Tavern. He threw a chair through the window and accused travelers of trying to bury him alive." Alric sighed and rubbed his eyes. "And where is he now?" Thorn continued. "It took 3 guards to bring him in. He's in the East Wing Infirmary." "That's the 3rd one in 2 seasons, Miranda said softly. "4th, Thorn corrected. "Prince Ryan appeared 2 nights ago. He was last seen in the northern garden just before sunset. We've searched everywhere." "Anyone seen anything?" Miranda asked. Thorn shook his head. "No one." They all understood. Another royal lost. The pattern was repeating. Madness and disappearances. The kingdom still looked beautiful on the outside, but something was wrong underneath. Some believed the royal bloodline was cursed. Others said it was punishment for their past sins. Either way, people were afraid. The signs were growing. Even commoners were being affected now. Alric looked out the window at the roses, beautiful and overwhelming. This couldn't continue, not with his children at risk.
"I'll find what's going on," he said. "This won't be our legacy."
Miranda looked at him worried. "Just don't lose yourself in the search." But Alric already felt drawn in. Something deep within was calling, and he would follow it, wherever it led. At dawn, the castle gates opened. Alric stood ready, cloaked, saddled, and focused. The sun had barely risen, casting gold across the hills. Behind him, Miranda approached with pain in her eyes. "Must you do this?" she said.
"I must," he replied,
pressing her hand to his lips.
"I've watched our bloodline fade into madness. I can't sit safely inside these walls while our people suffer, and while you and the children remain in danger. I won't wait for it to take us too."
Miranda met his eyes. "Then promise me you'll come back." The king was silent. "Promise me, Alric." He looked at her and finally said it.
"I will."
With 5 guards behind him, Alric rode into the lower grounds and the narrow alleys. Tangled rose vines had overtaken the fences and homes. He felt like a stranger in his own kingdom. At the edge of the market, an old woman appeared, wrapped in furs, her face marked with tribal paint. One eye was clouded, the other sharp. She pointed at him. Her voice was brittle when she spoke. "You will pay." Alric dismounted, but she vanished into the crowd. He searched the alleys. Nothing.
"Just an old crone," a guard muttered. "Ignore her."
But her voice echoed in Alric's mind. By afternoon, they reached Glenmere Hollow, an unmarked forest that few would dare go. Its blackened trees and low mist stirred unease in the horses. This was the only place the king suspected people to be lost in, for strange, unanswered myths to come from.
"We shouldn't go in," a guard warned.
"That's why I must," Alric answered.
"If I don't go where others vanish, what kind of king am I?"
He gave the order for his guards to stay behind, then entered alone. At first, only silence. The paths bent wrong, and the trees leaned unnaturally. The forest seemed to loop back on itself. It didn't take long for the king's horse to get spooked. He reared up, scared and blowing. The king dismounted and tied him to a tree, then walked for a bit. The air began to thicken, and a silence surrounded him. The roses disappeared. In their place, rot and ash and cracked black soil. Beneath the surface, something faintly glowed, like buried glass. The king knelt on the ground, moving the earth with his bare hands. Something was down there. He kept digging and ripping vines until an opening was big enough for him to get a good look. Just below the surface, a wooden ladder lay embedded in the vines. The king looked behind him. He couldn't even see his horse anymore. With some flint, he set his torch ablaze, scanning the deep hole. Something glistened below as Alric
made his descent underground.
The king stood in a chamber of marble, lit by faint, glowing crystals. Ahead of him, a gate of twisted iron and thorn. This place seemed long forgotten. He pushed through the creaking gate. The light dimmed further, and moss crawled over everything. In the center stood a pool, dark as ink, still as stone. Around the edges floated white petals, untouched by the decaying encircling them. Alric stepped to the edge. His reflection stared up at him. And then, a woman stood beside him. It was an illusion. Her robes were woven from storm-colored thread. Braids coiled around her crown, which was shaped from carved bone. Her eyes met his through the reflection.
"Who are you?" the king said.
The water rippled, and then it changed. The reflection broke and reformed, not a vision, but a memory. One not his, yet known. It unfolded before his eyes like a forgotten dream. He saw the royal grounds, his royal grounds. The same garden paths, the same carved arches. But there were no roses, just stone and the open sky. Two people moved across the land. One bore the crest, his ancestors of kings. The other wore the most beautiful feathers, and their faces were painted. He recognized them. They were the inhabitants of his land long ago. The king got a sickening feeling inside as he watched.
"What happened to your people?" he said.
The woman in the pool vanished, but her memory echoed. Truth has a cost. Be careful what you wish for. Alric kept wandering further down the long halls. Now he could see familiar pillars and cannons belonging to his family. Then a mound lay on the ground floor, covered in rotten vines. A body. His family was disappearing, finding this place and going mad. This place was the source of their curse. A figure fluttered in the darkness. As the king's eyes adjusted, he saw it. It couldn't be. A peacock. Its feathers shimmered with impossible color, iridescent blues and golds. He stepped closer, unable to believe it was real. "I thought you were all gone," he whispered. The burn turned its luminous eyes on him.
"Tell me, great creature, what happened long ago?"
The peacock fanned his great tail feathers, and the king saw the memory. He saw his family's castle grounds, untouched by stone or conquest. His ancestors stood beneath a high sun, offering peace to the land's original people. Peacocks roamed freely then, guardians of balance, moving among the indigenous tribes with grace. He watched an elder, wrapped in dyed cloth, kneel before one of the birds and make a wish. For rain, food, they wished for the earth's blessings. But in the shadowed edges of the vision, Alric saw a man watching. His great-great-grandfather. The peace had been a lie. He learned of the peacock's wish, and he wanted them all. Cannons were hidden within the castle's hills. The tribes were invited, and slaughter followed. The earth was torn apart. The peacocks, creatures of spirit and memory, rushed to protect the people. They fell one by one in a flurry of color and fire. All but one. Alric staggered as the memory faded, and a terrible grief came over him. For the peacock, a sorrow so old it trembled in his bones. Trapped beneath the kingdom that had betrayed it, alone for generations, while above, roses bloomed in soil fed by forgotten rot. Alric stood before the peacock. "I now know what we did," he said, voice echoing through the ruins. "And I'm sorry." The peacock tilted its head, ancient eyes filled with sorrow. "I can't fix the past," Alric continued, "but I can free you. I can tell your story. The truth." He walked to an old cannon, half buried in vines. Inside, a loaded shot. He brushed the metal clean, and for a moment, it looked like madness. But he turned the cannon upward, towards the top. "I want to make my wish now," he said. The peacock stood still, glowing softly in the faded light. "I wish for your kind to return, for skies full of color again, for the world to remember." With shaking hands, Alric lit the fuse. "Go," he shouted, waving his arms. "Fly!" The peacock launched upward just as... boom! The cannon fired, blowing a hole in the ceiling. Sunlight poured in, catching the bird mid-flight. The earth split open, and with it, roses began to fall beneath crumbling stone. Alric climbed, scraping his hands until he reached the surface. A massive crack ripping through the forest, headed straight for the castle. "No," he whispered. "My family." Guards screamed behind him, swallowed by the earth. The king had managed to mount one of the guards' horses. He raced towards the castle, against the crumbling earth below. All he could think about was his family. He had to reach them before the castle fell. Above him, the sky darkened, almost completely blocking out the sun. For a moment, it seemed death itself had come for them all. What he had imagined as dark clouds now became clear. Thousands of peacocks soared overhead, shimmering in blue, greens, and gold. Their wings beating in a rhythmic sound louder than the crumbling grounds. More and more peacocks came from the sky and flocked overhead. Alric slowed in shock of what he was witnessing. Each bird carried a stone, then began dropping them into the rift. One by one, the stones fell, piling into the crumbling earth, slowing it. The king looked ahead, still racing towards his family. Stone by stone fell, and then the ground went still. Alric slowed, panting with exhaustion. It had to have stopped just short of a mile before crushing his castle. Above, the peacocks circled once before him, their feathers glistening and falling before him before vanishing to the sky. Beautiful roses mixed with the transcendent feathers lay the pathway to the castle that stood tall.